When the Vorak ascendancy turned the agricultural colony of Proxima, 9, into radioactive glass, Emperor Morath laughed from his obsidian seat. "They are only humans," he told his war council, "soft, divided, and fragile. A species that cannot even agree on how to govern its own mudball." He expected a swift surrender, a tearful plea for mercy from a species barely out of its own cradle. He didn't know that humanity doesn't just fight. We industrialize vengeance. We didn't send diplomats. We unified our fractured world, handed the keys to Lockheed and Raytheon, and declared total war. This is the story of the galaxy's greatest mistake. The Galactic Council Chamber, suspended in the upper atmosphere of the gas giant Othris, was a place of impossible geometry and silent judgment. For 10,000 years, the Vorak Ascendancy had ruled the Orion Spur through a doctrine of absolute, terrifying supremacy. They were a towering, bipedal species, clad in biometallic armor that fused with their nervous systems. To them, the lesser races were either vassals or target practice. Then came humanity. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 40 years prior, utilizing a rudimentary and heavily modified Alcubierre drive. We were the new kids on the block, desperate to trade our titanium, water, and cultural exports for advanced medical technology. Ambassador Richard Lewis, a seasoned diplomat from the United Nations Space Command, stood in the center of the council chamber. He was a small, graying man in a dark suit, clutching a datapad containing a treaty of mutual prosperity and non-aggression. Emperor Morath loomed over him from a raised command dais, his 4 crimson eyes blinking in lazy synchronization. "Ambassador Lewis," Morath's voice resonated through the chamber, translated by neural implants into a discording baritone that shook the human's ribcage. "You offer us grain. You offer us copper and primitive combustion schematics. In exchange, you ask for the Ascendancy's 0-point energy matrix. Do you think we are merchants, human, or conquerors?" Richard Lewis cleared his throat, maintaining a steady gaze. "Emperor, we offer a partnership. Earth is rapidly expanding. We have a workforce of 12 billion. We can manufacture, we can mine, we can build. A partnership would be mutually beneficial, saving both our peoples from the friction of border disputes." A low, grating sound echoed through the hall. It took the translation software a moment to process it. The Emperor was laughing. It was a cruel, metallic sound. "Friction? There is no friction between a boot and an insect, Ambassador," Morath sneered. "Your species is a chaotic mess of fractured nation-states. You spent the last 3 centuries bombing your own cities over imaginary lines in the dirt and invisible deities. You are fragile. You are weak. You are only humans." Morath raised a heavily armored hand, swiping a claw through the holographic display terminal beside him. "I do not sign treaties with livestock," Morath declared. "I issue compliance directives, and to ensure you understand your place in my galaxy, I have already sent an enforcement fleet to your furthest expansion." Richard's blood ran cold. "Proxima, 9? Emperor. That is an unarmed agricultural world. There are 3 million civilians there." "There were 3 million civilians there," Morath corrected coldly. The central holographic projector flickered, displaying a live feed from a Vorak dreadnought. The lush green and blue sphere of Proxima, 9 hung in the void. Suddenly, brilliant lances of antimatter bombardment tore from the Vorak ships, striking the planetary surface. The crust cracked. Entire continents flashed into blinding white light as the atmosphere ignited. Within 60 seconds, the thriving colony was reduced to a swirling, molten rock of radioactive ash. Richard Lewis dropped his datapad. The glass screen shattered on the polished floor, the only sound in the dead silence of the council chamber. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of chilling, absolute stillness. "Submit your homeworld to our colonial administration within 30 of your Earth days," Morath commanded, leaning back into his seat, "or Earth will share Proxima's fate. Dismissed." The Emperor expected the human to fall to his knees. He expected begging. Instead, Richard Lewis slowly knelt, picked up the shattered pieces of his datapad, and stood back up. His voice, when he spoke, lacked any diplomatic warmth. It was flat. "Dead. 30 days, Richard whispered. "You should have given us 0. As the ambassador turned and walked out of the chamber, his spine ramrod straight, Morith dismissed the interaction entirely. To the Ascendancy, they had just squashed a mildly annoying pest. They had no concept of human history. They did not understand the sleeping giant they had just kicked awake. When the encrypted transmission from Authries reached Earth, the planet stopped. For 24 hours, there was global mourning. 3 million souls incinerated in the blink of an eye. The footage of Proxima, Nine's destruction, played on every screen from Times Square to Tokyo, from Piccadilly Circus to New Delhi. But the sorrow quickly burned away, leaving something far more dangerous behind: absolute unified rage. The United Nations didn't fracture as Emperor Morath had predicted. It calcified. Within 48 hours, an emergency session convened in Geneva. There was no bickering over borders, no arguments over trade, tariffs, or political ideologies. The survival instinct of an apex predator had been triggered on a planetary scale. General David Hackett, a battle-hardened veteran of the Resource Wars, was appointed Supreme Commander of the newly formed United Earth Defense Coalition. Hackett was a pragmatist, a man who understood that humanity could not beat the Vorak with laser-for-laser space combat. The aliens had a 10,000-year head start. "We don't fight them in a gentleman's duel," Hackett announced to the silent assembly of world leaders. "We fight them like humans. We outproduce them. We out-innovate them. And we drag them down into the mud." To do this, governments realized they couldn't rely on sluggish, bureaucratic military-industrial complexes. They needed the ruthless efficiency of the private sector. The total war economy was initiated, but with a terrifying modern twist. Hackett bypassed standard protocols and summoned the CEOs of the world's most powerful private corporations to a bunker beneath the Pentagon. There were no contracts negotiated, no profit margins discussed. The survival of the species was the only currency left. "Everything your companies own belongs to the species now," Hackett told the gathered executives. Palantir's CEO Jonathan Karp immediately handed over the architecture of their global predictive AI networks. Within days, Palantir's software was repurposed from market prediction and counterterrorism to mapping out Vorak fleet movements using deep space gravitational anomalies. Boeing and Airbus halted all commercial airline production. Their massive hangars in Seattle and Toulouse were stripped bare, retooled overnight by armies of engineers working 20-hour shifts. They weren't building fighter jets. They were building atmospheric deployment, dropships, and kinetic railgun platforms. SpaceX and Blue Origin were drafted in their entirety. The colossal orbital shipyards surrounding the moon, previously used for civilian Mars transit, became the beating heart of Earth's new war machine. The proprietary Raptor engine schematics were open source to every manufacturing plant on the planet. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division, known for its black budget secrecy, threw its doors wide open. Chief Engineer Eleanor Braddock, a brilliant, no-nonsense aerospace pioneer, took charge of Earth's flagship project. The Vorak rely on energy shielding to deflect plasma and laser fire, Braddock explained to Hackett in a smoke-filled briefing room, pointing at holographic cross-sections of alien dreadnoughts. Their shields disperse heat and energy beautifully, but they've never fought a species stupid enough to use raw, unguided, kinetic mass in space. "You're talking about throwing rocks, Eleanor?" Hackett asked, a grim smile playing on his lips. "I'm talking about throwing very, very fast rocks, General," Braddock replied. "We take Class M asteroids from the belt. We hollow them out. We strap 6 dozen modified super heavy fusion engines to the back, and we wire Palantir's targeting AI into the steering matrix. We don't need lasers. Sir, Isaac Newton is the deadliest son of a bitch in space." The mobilization was unprecedented in human history. Factories that built cars on Monday were stamping out depleted uranium railgun shells by Friday. The global populace didn't panic. They clocked in. Retirees went back to assembly lines. Universities transitioned entirely to wartime engineering and combat medicine. The sheer industrial output of Earth, a planet accustomed to consumerist hyper-production, was suddenly funneled into a single, terrifying spear point. The Vorak Ascendancy had given Earth 30 days to submit. On day 29, the Sol system was a fortified fortress. The asteroid belt had been mined, weaponized, and rigged. Earth's meager fleet of exploration vessels had been stripped of their science labs, replaced with heavy armor plating and railguns the size of skyscrapers. Humanity didn't wait for the deadline. They didn't send a message of submission. Instead, General Hackett authorized a single, tight beam broadcast directed at the approaching Vorak armada. The message was just 3 words long: "Come and get it." Commander Xylar of the Vorak Vanguard fleet stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Eclipse of Reason. His fleet consisted of 200 warships, sleek, biometallic leviathans that shimmered with dark energy fields. They had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, near the orbit of Neptune, expecting to find a panicked, defenseless Earth waiting to be enslaved. "Commander," the ship's sensor officer chimed, his mandibles clicking in confusion. "I am reading no defensive formations around the human homeworld, no energy grids, no plasma signatures." Xylar scoffed, crossing his upper set of arms. "Because they have nothing, fool. They are primates playing with fire. Emperor Morath was right. They have likely turned their primitive weapons on themselves in despair. Set course for the blue planet. Standard subjugation speed." The Vorak fleet moved in a tight, arrogant formation, a wedge of unparalleled destruction slicing through the dark. They passed the orbit of Uranus. Then Saturn. They did not know that humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology. It was our deception. Aboard the stealth retrofitted command carrier UNSC Churchill, hidden in the chaotic electromagnetic interference of Jupiter's Great Red Spot, Admiral Jonathan Cole watched the tactical display. Cole was a tactician who had studied ancient naval warfare, applying the ruthless logic of submarine combat to the vacuum of space. "They're taking the bait," Admiral Cole murmured, his eyes locked on the glowing red icons creeping across the holographic map. "They're moving right through the Jupiter-Mars corridor, tightly packed." "Palantir targeting matrices are locked, sir," reported Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins, her fingers flying across a haptic keyboard. "Predictive algorithms confirm the Vorak shields are calibrated for energy dispersal, not kinetic impact. They haven't raised physical deflectors." "Because who throws rocks in the 23rd century?" Cole smiled darkly. "Execute Operation Gravel Pit." Deep within the asteroid belt, entirely dark and completely silent, lay Eleanor Braddock's creations. To the Vorak sensors, they registered simply as ambient space debris, lifeless chunks of iron and nickel drifting through the void. But as Jenkins entered the command code, the void woke up. Simultaneously, 200 massive asteroids, some the size of small cities, violently ignited. Thousands of modified SpaceX-designed fusion drives flared to life, burning with the intensity of captured stars. On the bridge of the Eclipse of Reason, the Vorak sensor officer shrieked, "Commander, massive thermal blooms detected! Dead ahead, port, and starboard! They are, by the ancestors, the debris field is accelerating." "Evasive action!" Xylar bellowed, his 4 eyes widening in sheer panic. "Bring the plasma lances online! Melt them!" It was too late. The alien ships, designed for elegant ship-to-ship energy duels at long range, were entirely unequipped for the sheer, brutal physics of what was coming. An asteroid designated Hammer, 1, weighing 6 million metric tons, accelerated to 20% the speed of light, riding a pillar of blue atomic fire. It slammed into the lead Vorak cruiser. The alien energy shield flashed brilliantly, attempting to disperse the kinetic energy. But a shield designed to scatter photons and plasma cannot stop millions of tons of solid iron. The shield shattered like glass. The asteroid tore through the sleek biometallic hull of the cruiser, ripping it in half before continuing onward, completely unaffected, to smash into a second ship behind it. The silence of space was filled with the blinding flashes of kinetic annihilation. Admiral Cole watched the tactical map as red icon after red icon simply blinked out of existence. It wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. Humanity wasn't aiming at the Vorak ships. They had simply flooded the entire corridor with unstoppable hypervelocity mass. It was a cosmic shotgun blast. "Vanguard fleet formation is broken," Jenkins reported, her voice tight with adrenaline. "They are attempting to retreat, sir, respooling their FTL drives." "Negative," Cole ordered, his voice cold as the vacuum outside. "We don't let them run. We show them what total war means. Release the hounds." From the dark side of Mars, Earth's true fleet emerged. They were not pretty ships. They lacked the sleek lines of the Vorak vessels. They were brutalist, angular blocks of heavy armor built in the orbital shipyards of Boeing and Lockheed. They bristled with heavy railguns and point defense rotary cannons. As the surviving Vorak ships desperately tried to maneuver out of the asteroid bombardment, the human fleet fell upon them. The railguns fired, sending depleted uranium slugs tearing through the alien engines, crippling them. Commander Xylar clung to his command console as alarms wailed and his ship bled atmosphere into the void. His fleet, 200 of the finest warships in the Ascendancy, had been decimated in less than 12 minutes by rocks and crude metal slugs. "Broadcast a surrender!" Xylar screamed to his comms officer. "Tell them we yield!" A transmission cut through the static on the Vorak bridge. It wasn't a human voice. It was an automated, pre-recorded message that looped on every open frequency. It was the voice of the late Ambassador Richard Lewis, synthesized and weaponized. "I do not sign treaties with livestock," the recorded voice of Emperor Morath echoed back at them. "We are only humans," Ambassador Lewis's voice replied softly, "and we don't take prisoners." A final volley of railgun fire tore through the Eclipse of Reason, rupturing its dark energy core. The dreadnought imploded, collapsing into a brief, violent singularity before expanding into a silent shockwave of debris. The first battle of the Sol system was over. Humanity had lost exactly 0 ships. But on Earth, General Hackett knew this was only the beginning. The Vanguard was just a scouting force. The full might of the Vorak Ascendancy would come next. Yet, as he looked at the casualty reports and the absolute decimation of the alien fleet, a chilling realization washed over him. The aliens had made a fatal miscalculation. They believed war was an art form, a noble pursuit of the ascended. Humanity knew the truth. War wasn't an art. It was an industry. And business was booming. News of the Vanguard's annihilation did not reach the Vorak Ascendancy through a formal declaration, nor through the boastful gloating typical of galactic skirmishes. It arrived as a solitary, automated telemetry drone, heavily damaged by a stray railgun slug, limping back to the core worlds. When the drone's black box was cracked and the tactical feeds were projected into the Galactic Council chamber on Othris, the silence that followed was absolute. Emperor Morath stared at the holographic replay. He watched his 200 invincible warships vessels that had subdued whole star systems pulverized into shrapnel by accelerating chunks of raw rock. He watched the primitive, brutalist human ships mop up the survivors with kinetic weaponry that the Ascendancy had deemed obsolete 5 millennia ago. "An ambush," one of his counselors hissed, his mandibles clicking nervously. "A cowardly, uncultured trap. They used dead matter, Emperor. There was no honor in this engagement." "Honor is a luxury of the unopposed," Morath growled, his 4 eyes narrowing as he replayed the destruction of the Eclipse of Reason. The sheer, kinetic violence of the human attack deeply unsettled him, though he would never admit it. "They have turned their entire system into a primitive trap, but a trap only works once. Mobilize the core armada, 1,000 ships. We will not engage in their debris fields. We will glass their planet from the edge of their gravity well. They are still only humans." Morath's arrogance remained intact, but his understanding of his enemy was catastrophically flawed. He believed humanity had played its only card. He did not realize that the Sol system's defense was merely Earth buying time to transition from a defensive posture to a total offensive war footing. Back on Earth, the military-industrial machine had shifted gears, moving from desperation to calculated extermination. General David Hackett knew that hiding behind the asteroid belt wouldn't save them forever. The Vorak would eventually adapt. Earth had to take the fight to the Ascendancy, and to do that, they needed to exploit the Vorak's fundamental weakness, their reliance on elegant, long-range energy combat. In a massive underground testing facility in Nevada, Hackett stood behind reinforced glass alongside Eleanor Braddock and Robert Sinclair, the lead weapons architect for Raytheon. Below them, a mock-up of a Vorak dreadnought corridor had been meticulously reconstructed from sensor data and debris recovered from the Jupiter-Mars corridor. "The Vorak ships are pressurized," Sinclair explained, his voice echoing through the observation deck over the PA system. "They breathe an oxygen-nitrogen mix, much like ours, albeit at a slightly higher pressure. Their biometallic armor is incredible against lasers and plasma. It dissipates heat across the hull, but it is rigidly linked to their nervous systems." "Meaning?" Hackett asked, crossing his arms. "Meaning, General, that they are highly susceptible to hydrostatic shock and blunt force trauma," Sinclair smiled grimly. "If you hit them with a laser, the armor absorbs it. If you hit them with a burst of 12-gauge tungsten buckshot, The kinetic transfer liquefies their internal organs, even if the armor doesn't penetrate. Hackett raised an eyebrow. You want to board them. I want to butcher them, Sinclair corrected flatly. He pressed a button on his console. General, the Vorak fight with plasma staffs and ceremonial blades. They fight like knights. We are going to introduce them to the trenches. The heavy steel doors at the end of the mock-up corridor blew open with a deafening concussive blast. From the smoke, the vanguard of Earth's new infantry emerged. But they weren't human. They were Boston Dynamics quadrupedal combat units, heavily armored and terrifyingly fast. Nicknamed trench sweepers, the robotic hounds moved with predatory fluidity, armed with automated, drum-fed shotguns and twin flamethrowers mounted on their carapaces. They swarmed into the corridor, identifying the simulated Vorak targets instantly. The roar of automatic shotgun fire filled the facility, followed by the blinding wash of napalm. Within 3 seconds, every target in the corridor was reduced to burning scrap. Behind the hounds came the human element, the orbital drop-shock infantry. They wore powered exoskeletons designed jointly by DARPA and General Dynamics. The suits weren't elegant. They were bulky, heavily plated in ceramic titanium composites, and completely insulated against the vacuum of space. They carried heavy kinetic assault rifles, rotary grenade launchers, and brutal pneumatic breaching axes meant for tearing through ship bulkheads. The Ascendancy builds cathedrals in space, Braddock noted, watching the infantry systematically clear the room with flashbangs and overwhelming kinetic force. They need open space for their plasma weapons to disperse. Our strategy is simple. We bypass their shields, breach their hulls, and flood their cathedrals with mud, dogs, and shotguns. But getting close enough to a Vorak vessel to board it was a mathematical nightmare. The human fleet was too slow to close the distance without taking catastrophic losses from the Vorak's long-range plasma lances. That was where Cyber Command came in. Operating out of a deeply classified sub-basement at Fort Meade, a joint task force of NSA cryptographers and Palantir engineers had made a horrifying discovery while analyzing the salvaged biometallic armor of the dead Vorak scouts. The aliens didn't just use neural interfaces to pilot their ships. Their entire communication network was biological. They were constantly connected to their ship's mainframe through a localized neural web. It's a glaring security flaw, reported Dr. Alan Turing, a brilliant, eccentric coder who had legally changed his name to honor his idol. He addressed Hackett via a secure video link. Their network is organic. They don't have firewalls, General. They have immune systems. And human history is uniquely well-versed in defeating immune systems. Dr. Turing's team didn't write a computer virus. They wrote a digital neurotoxin. By piggybacking on the Vorak's own tight beam communication frequencies, Earth could broadcast a localized electromagnetic pulse laced with a scrap of code that specifically targeted the Vorak neural interface. It wouldn't shut down the ship. It would induce massive, paralyzing seizures in the crew. We call it the Gorgon Protocol, Turing said softly. When we broadcast this, anyone plugged into the ship's network is going to experience a grand mal seizure. It buys us exactly 4 minutes before their biological systems adapt and flush the code. Hackett looked at the heavily armored shock troops standing amidst the burning wreckage of the test corridor. 4 minutes was an eternity for a species that had perfected the art of the blitzkrieg. Pack the dropships, Hackett ordered. We are going to Sirius. The Sirius star system, located just 8.6 light-years from Earth, was home to Sirius Prime, the Ascendancy's massive forward operating base and primary shipyard in the local sector. It was an orbital fortress of staggering proportions, a glittering ring of metallic spires and dry docks suspended above a gas giant, churning out warships to crush insubordinate worlds. Overseer Valken, the commander of the Sirius Yards, was currently overseeing the retrofitting of 3 supercarriers intended for the Earth campaign. He considered the humans a localized nuisance, an infestation that would soon be sterilized by the Emperor's core armada. He was standing on the observation deck of the Central Command Spire when the proximity alarms began to scream. "Report!" Valken barked, his neural link flashing with frantic data streams. "Hyperspace ruptures detected at the edge of the gravity well," his tactical officer shrieked. "Multiple signatures. No, wait. Thousands of signatures." The human fleet did not drop out of faster-than-light travel in a neat, organized formation. They materialized in a chaotic, sprawling cloud of jagged metal and fury. Admiral Jonathan Cole had brought a strike force of 300 dreadnoughts and over 2,000 heavily armored stealth dropships, painted absolute black to blend with the void. "Raise the energy matrix. All plasma batteries target the capital ships," Valken ordered, his confidence unshaken. "They are fools to attack us here." The Vorak orbital batteries hummed to life, charging blinding lances of superheated plasma. But Admiral Cole didn't order his ships to fire their railguns. Instead, he ordered a full fleet broadcast. "Execute the Gorgon Protocol," Cole commanded from the bridge of the UNSC Churchill. Across the Sirius orbital ring, every Vorak ship, defense platform, and command spire received an overpowering burst of encrypted data. It hit the Vorak neural network like a physical hammer. On the observation deck, Valken collapsed. His four eyes rolled back into his head as his biometallic armor violently seized, locking his muscles in place. Around him, his entire bridge crew hit the floor, convulsing and gasping for air. The orbital batteries, left without neural-linked operators, simply stopped charging. The majestic, impenetrable defense grid of Sirius Prime went entirely dark. 4 minutes on the clock, Cole announced smoothly. "Launch the pods." From the bellies of the human dreadnoughts, thousands of Northrop Grumman drop pods were fired. They weren't flying. They were fired like massive artillery shells directly at the Vorak shipyard. They crossed the distance in seconds, tearing through the deactivated energy shields and slamming brutally into the sides of the orbital ring. The pods deployed explosive-shaped charges, blowing massive holes into the pressurized hulls of the Vorak stations. Before the oxygen could even vent into space, the trench sweeper hounds poured through the breaches. Overseer Valken, fighting through the agonizing digital seizure in his brain, managed to pull himself to his knees just as the blast doors to his command deck were blown completely off their hinges. He expected to see noble warriors step through the smoke to challenge him. Instead, a metallic quadruped the size of a predator cat-bounded into the room. It didn't pause. It didn't speak. Its automated turret locked onto the nearest convulsing Vorak guard and unleashed a deafening burst of tungsten buckshot. The guard's bio-armor absorbed the laser focus of the Ascendancy, but it could not stop the sheer kinetic force of 30 metal pellets traveling at supersonic speeds. The guard was thrown backward, instantly dead. "Defend the spire!" Valken roared, drawing his ceremonial plasma staff. But the hounds were just the distraction. Through the smoke stepped Commander James Reaper Donovan, leading a platoon of orbital drop-shock infantry. Encased in their bulky, heavily scarred DARPA exoskeletons, the humans looked like walking tanks. A Vorak elite guard lunged at Donovan, swinging his glowing plasma staff in a wide, elegant arc, designed to sever a limb in a single strike. Donovan didn't try to parry. He simply stepped inside the guard's reach, took the glancing blow on his ceramic titanium shoulder plate, which scorched but held, and drove his pneumatic breaching axe straight through the alien's chest plate. The crunch of biometal and bone was sickeningly loud. Donovan ripped the axe free and fired his rotary grenade launcher point-blank down the corridor. The combat that followed wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. The Vorak, trained for thousands of years in the art of honorable long-range engagements and elegant melee dueling, completely unraveled when faced with the savage, close-quarters brutality of human infantry. The humans didn't fight fair. They used flashbangs that blinded the Vorak's four eyes. They used white phosphorus grenades that burned through the air filtration systems. They used overwhelming, coordinated violence of action. Within 3 minutes and 45 seconds, exactly 15 seconds before the Gorgon Protocol was meant to wear off, the command deck of Sirius Prime was secured. Donovan walked over to where Overseer Valken lay bleeding, his leg shattered by a shotgun blast. The alien stared up at the human, his crimson eyes filled with a terrifying realization. These were not primitive apes. They were monsters. You fight like beasts," Valken spat, coughing up violet blood. "No honor. No grace." Donovan crouched down, the hydraulic servos in his exoskeleton whining. He unsealed his heavy faceplate, revealing a face scarred by the resource wars, his eyes cold and devoid of any pity. "Grace is for the dead," Donovan replied, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You burned 3 million of our people over a trade dispute. We aren't here to win a duel, Overseer. We're here to burn down your house." Donovan stood up and tapped his comms link. "Admiral Cole, command spire secured. The orbital grid is ours." "Understood, Commander." Cole's voice crackled back. "Have your engineering teams move to Sector 4. There is a fully intact Vorak supercarrier sitting in dry dock. I want it. Valken's eyes widened in sheer horror. You cannot comprehend our technology. You will tear yourselves apart trying to pilot a supercarrier. Donovan just smiled, a terrifying, predatory baring of teeth. We don't want to pilot it, buddy. We want to strip it down to the bolts. We want your zero-point energy matrix. We want your FTL drives. And once the boys at Lockheed figure out how they work, we're going to put them on a rock the size of Manhattan and drop it on your Emperor's head. The siege of Sirius was over in less than an hour. The Ascendancy's primary shipyard was firmly in human hands. They had captured enough raw technology to leapfrog human engineering forward by 1,000 years. When the transmission of the shipyard's fall reached Emperor Morath, the laughter finally died in his throat. The Galactic Council chamber was deathly silent. The humans had not just defended their mudball. They had reached out across the void, grabbed the Vorak Ascendancy by the throat, and squeezed. Earth was no longer playing defense. They were coming for the crown, and they were bringing hell with them. The captured Vorak supercarrier sat in the orbital dry docks of Sirius Prime like a beached whale, swarmed by thousands of human engineers in pressurized EVA suits. They didn't treat the alien vessel with the reverence of archaeologists discovering a holy relic. They treated it like a stolen car in a chop shop. Under the relentless direction of Eleanor Braddock, Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division, alongside propulsion experts from Blue Origin, systematically dismantled the Ascendancy's crown jewel. They bypassed the biometric locks with shape charges, ripped out the ceremonial command thrones to make room for server racks, and violently excised the zero-point energy matrix from the ship's bowels. Within 72 hours, the Vorak's most closely guarded technological secrets were unspooled and uploaded to the Pentagon's secure servers. The fundamental architecture of their FTL drive is surprisingly simple. General Braddock reported via tight beam to General David Hackett on Earth. She was standing in the gutted engine room of the supercarrier, holding a greasy datapad. They use a focused gravimetric field to fold space, powered by the zero-point matrix. But they've hard-coded safety limiters into the matrix to prevent the bubble from collapsing. They prioritize stability. Hackett, staring at the holographic projection of the Vorak Core Armada mobilizing on the far side of the Orion Spur, did not have time for stability. Emperor Morath was bringing 1,000 warships to Glass Earth, and they were barely a week away. "Can you remove the limiters, Eleanor?" Hackett asked, his voice deadpan. Braddock smirked, wiping a streak of black coolant from her forehead. "I already did. When you remove the safety protocols, the drive doesn't just fold space, it tears it. If we attach this matrix to a large enough mass, we won't just hit them with a rock, we'll hit them with localized gravitational collapse." This was the birth of Project Oppenheimer. Humanity did not have the time or resources to build 1,000 ships to match the Vorak Core Armada. The alien fleet was a rolling wall of death, equipped with overlapping plasma shields and enough firepower to crack a terrestrial planet in half. A conventional engagement, even with Earth's new kinetic tactics, would result in mutual annihilation at best. Instead, Earth decided to build a single bullet. Deep in the asteroid belt of the Sol system, SpaceX autonomous mining drones had spent the last week dragging a metallic asteroid designated Ceres Alpha into a geostationary orbit around Mars. It was an iron-nickel behemoth, roughly the size of the island of Manhattan, weighing billions of metric tons. Using the schematics stolen from Sirius Prime, a joint task force of human engineers began grafting the captured Vorak zero-point energy matrix and a heavily modified FTL drive directly into the core of the asteroid. But they didn't stop there. Jonathan Karp and his Palantir team installed a suicidal, single-use predictive AI into the rock's guidance system. The AI's only purpose was to calculate the exact microsecond the Vorak Armada dropped out of hyperspace and plot an intercept course that defied the laws of alien physics. The payload: 8.5 billion tons of raw iron-nickel alloy. The engine: an unshackled Vorak zero-point matrix, rigged to overload upon impact. The delivery system: a hacked FTL drive with its safety limiters completely bypassed. The name: the Oppenheimer. Meanwhile, Emperor Morath stood upon the gold-inlaid command dais of his flagship, the Wrath of the Ascended. He was flanked by his royal guard, clad in shimmering, impenetrable bioarmor. Surrounding his flagship were 1,000 of the deadliest vessels in the galaxy. He was furious. The fall of Sirius Prime was an indignity. The Ascendancy had not suffered in 10 millennia. We will not ask for their surrender, Morith decreed to his fleet commanders, his voice echoing across the tight beam neural network. We will not offer them subjugation. We will strip the atmosphere from their world and leave their bones to bake in the radiation of their own star. Humanity ends today. The core armada entered the slipstream, a terrifying armada of sleek, dark energy predators slicing through the fabric of space-time. Their destination was the edge of the Sol system, just past the orbit of Pluto. Morath intended to arrive in overwhelming force, deploy a localized interdiction field to prevent any human ships from escaping, and systematically annihilate every planet from the outer rim to the sun. He did not know that humanity wasn't waiting at Earth. They were waiting in the dark. Hidden in the sensor-scattering static of Neptune's upper atmosphere, Admiral Jonathan Cole sat in the command chair of the UNSC Churchill. His fleet was small, only 50 dreadnoughts and a handful of stealth carriers, but they were not there to fight. They were there to spot. Slipstream ruptures detected, Admiral Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins called out, her voice tight but disciplined. Massive energy spikes. It's the core armada. They are dropping back into real space at the Pluto-Charon Lagrange point. Feed the telemetry to the Oppenheimer, Cole ordered smoothly. Do not engage. Let them form up. On the tactical display, 1,000 red icons materialized in perfect, elegant symmetry. The Vorak fleet was a masterpiece of naval discipline, arranging themselves into a massive phalanx of overlapping shields. They were untouchable. They were magnificent. Telemetry locked, sir, Jenkins confirmed. Palantir AI on the Oppenheimer acknowledges receipt. FTL spooling in the Mars sector. Admiral Cole leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the massive red cluster on his screen. May God have mercy on their souls, because we are fresh out. Fire the rock. In the frozen, silent expanse of the Sol system, just beyond the orbital path of Pluto, the fabric of space-time began to stretch. On the bridge of the flagship Wrath of the Ascended, Emperor Morath sat upon a command throne carved from the obsidian core of a conquered world. He was surrounded by the absolute pinnacle of Vorak military doctrine. 1,000 dreadnoughts, destroyers, and carrier vessels hung in the void, arranged in a flawless, overlapping phalanx. Their biometallic hulls shimmered with dark energy shielding, casting a predatory violet glow against the distant, insignificant pinpoint of the human sun. Morath's 4 crimson eyes swept across the tactical readouts projected directly into his optic nerves. The journey through the slipstream had been perfect. His fleet was untouched, their plasma lances fully charged, their localized interdiction fields ready to deploy. Once those fields were raised, no human vessel would be able to flee the system. "Emperor," whispered Commander Vorlak, the fleet's chief tactical officer, his mandibles vibrating with eager anticipation. "We have reached the optimal Lagrange point. Interdiction fields are spooling. In 3 of the human hours, we will be in range to strip the atmosphere from their blue planet." "Do not rush the bombardment, Vorlak," Morath replied, his deep voice rumbling through the pressurized bridge. "I want them to watch us approach. I want their primitive satellites to broadcast their doom to every screen on their mudball." They believed a few hollowed-out rocks and some stolen technology could challenge the ascendancy. Today, we remind the galaxy that humanity is nothing but a footnote. Morath raised a heavily armored hand, preparing to give the order to advance. He never gave it. Normally, faster-than-light travel is a graceful defiance of physics. Ships slip back into real space with a gentle gravimetric ripple, a polite announcement to the universe. But the Oppenheimer had been stripped of its safety protocols by Eleanor Braddock and the engineers at Lockheed Martin. It did not slip back into reality. It violently tore the door off its hinges. The alarm klaxons on the Wrath of the Ascended did not hum. They screamed. It was a digital shriek of absolute panic from the ship's biological nervous system. "Report!" Morath roared, surging to his feet as the massive dreadnought shuddered violently. "Emperor!" Vorlak gasped, falling to his knees as his neural link fed him impossible data. "Massive gravimetric anomaly, directly in the center of our formation." "It is. By the ancestors, the mass is incalculable. It is not a ship." Before Vorlak could utter another syllable, the localized slipstream rupture detonated. The Oppenheimer materialized. It was 8.5 billion tons of raw, jagged iron-nickel alloy, an asteroid the size of Manhattan, traveling at roughly 80% the speed of light. It did not fire a single weapon. It simply occupied the exact physical space as the dead center of the Vorak Armada. The kinetic transfer was a localized apocalypse. The Vorak shields, marvels of engineering designed to elegantly dissipate high-energy photons and plasma, were utterly meaningless against billions of tons of solid mass moving at relativistic speeds. 200 dreadnoughts ceased to exist in a microsecond. There was no explosion, no breaking apart of hulls. They were instantaneously compressed into atomic dust by the sheer blunt force trauma of the impact. The shockwave of displaced spatial matter radiated outward, cracking the biometallic spines of another 100 vessels, sending them spinning wildly into the void, hemorrhaging atmosphere and violet blood. But the physical impact of the SpaceX-delivered rock was merely the first phase of humanity's vengeance. Deep within the molten, crumbling core of the Oppenheimer, the unshackled Vorak zero-point energy matrix registered the catastrophic impact. Without its safety limiters, it performed exactly as Lockheed's engineers had calculated. It critically overloaded. The collapsing FTL field inverted, tearing a temporary localized hole in the fabric of space. For exactly 4.2 seconds, a miniature singularity, a black hole, bloomed in the center of the Vorak fleet. The visual was horrifyingly beautiful. The light from the distant stars warped and bent around a sphere of absolute, devouring blackness. The immense, crushing gravity gripped the surviving ships. Sleek, beautiful Vorak cruisers were dragged backward, their engines screaming as they fought the pull. Hulls stretched and spaghettified, the biometal groaning in agony before snapping completely. The silence of space was absolute, but the visual destruction was deafening. Then, the singularity evaporated. It released the pent-up, devoured energy in a blinding, spherical shockwave of exotic radiation and concussive force. On the bridge of the Wrath of the Ascended, the blast windows shattered inward. Emperor Morath was hurled through the air, his colossal frame smashing against the rear bulkhead with bone-crunching force. The flagship was thrown thousands of miles off course, its portside engines entirely sheared off by the shockwave, its dark energy core bleeding violently into the vacuum. Morath coughed, his vision swimming in a haze of violet blood. He dragged himself across the tilted, groaning deck, fighting through the agonizing screams of his dying crew. He pulled himself up to the emergency blast shutters that had slammed down over the shattered viewports. Through a jagged crack in the armor glass, Morath looked out at his invincible armada. It was a graveyard. Where 1,000 magnificent ships had formed an impenetrable wall, there was now only a sprawling, chaotic debris field of twisted metal, frozen bodies, and burning plasma trails. 700 ships had been vaporized or crushed by the singularity. The remaining 300 were dead in the water, drifting aimlessly, their life support failing and their weapons entirely offline. "No," Morath whispered, his voice trembling. The absolute certainty of his universe was fracturing. They are soft. They are divided." A spark of desperate suicidal rage ignited in Morath's chest. He activated his personal command override, connecting directly to his flagship's surviving systems. "Spool the remaining FTL drive!" Morath barked to the empty bridge, bypassing his dead crew. "Target Earth! Overload the reactor and jump us directly into their planetary core. We will take them with us." Deep in the bowels of the crippled flagship, the surviving reactor began to whine, building up a catastrophic charge. Morath intended to turn his own flagship into a planet-cracking kinetic missile. But humanity had anticipated the desperation of a dying apex predator. Half a solar system away, hidden in the sensor-scattering electromagnetic chaos of Neptune's orbit, Admiral Jonathan Cole watched the destruction unfold from the bridge of the UNSC Churchill. The human crew was deathly silent, staring at the holographic display in sheer awe of the devastation they had unleashed. Admiral Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins spoke up, her voice slicing through the stunned silence. Palantir's telemetry indicates a massive energy spike in the Vorak flagship. They are attempting a blind, overloaded FTL jump toward Earth coordinates. Cole did not flinch. He simply pressed a button on his armrest. "Dr. Turing," Shut him down. Deep beneath Fort Meade, Dr. Alan Turing and his Cyber Command Joint Task Force were already inside the Vorak network. The localized blast had severely weakened the flagship's biodigital immune system. Turing didn't just upload a virus. He unleashed a predatory algorithmic worm designed by Palantir specifically to hunt and devour Vorak command architecture. On Morath's bridge, the deep whine of the FTL drive abruptly died. The crimson emergency lighting flickered and turned completely black. The biometallic consoles withered, turning a sickly gray as the digital neurotoxin severed every system on the ship. Morath pounded a fist against the dead console. "No! Fire! Burn them!" A single crisp chime echoed through the darkened bridge. The central holographic projector, the only system deliberately left operational by the human hackers, flickered to life. It did not project a Vorak tactical map. It projected an office. General David Hackett sat behind a massive, scarred oak desk in the depths of the Pentagon. He was wearing his Class A uniform, perfectly pressed. To Morath's absolute bewilderment, the human was casually holding a ceramic mug of steaming black coffee. Hackett took a slow sip, set the mug down, and looked directly into the camera. "Emperor Morath," Hackett said, his voice calm, steady, and entirely devoid of the theatrical malice the Vorak were accustomed to. "This is General David Hackett of the United Earth Defense Coalition. I assume you enjoyed the fireworks." Morath bared his fangs, gripping his ceremonial plasma staff, a useless relic in the face of what had just occurred. You fight like cowards. You hide behind dead matter and digital trickery. The ascendancy spans 10,000 systems. We will breed 1,000,000,000 warriors. We will turn your sun black with our fleets. You will do exactly as I tell you to do, Morath," Hackett interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the icy weight of absolute authority. "Because right now, you are a bug under a very large boot, and I am deciding how hard to press." Hackett leaned forward, steepling his fingers on the desk. "We didn't just build one rock, Emperor. The industrial capacity of this planet was entirely mobilized 30 days ago. While your armada was gracefully parading through the slipstream, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Boeing have been working around the clock in the belt. We currently have 32 Oppenheimer-class kinetic kill vehicles strapped to bypassed FTL drives, fully fueled, and locked onto Palantir targeting matrices." Hackett tapped a finger against a manila folder on his desk. "We have the exact coordinates of Othris. We have the coordinates of your primary agricultural worlds, your orbital shipyards, and your civilian population centers. If I nod my head, I won't just destroy your military. I will wipe the Vorak ascendancy from the galactic historical record. I will shatter your homeworld into a new asteroid belt, and I will build a goddamn toll road through the rubble." Morath stared at the hologram. He looked for a bluff. He looked for the hesitation, the inherent weakness he believed plagued all lesser species. He found absolutely nothing. He saw only the cold, mechanical calculus of a species that had perfected the art of mutually assured destruction centuries before they ever left their atmosphere. "What? What is it you want?" Morath rasped, his massive shoulders finally slumping. The plasma staff slipped from his grip, clattering against the metal deck. "Unconditional surrender," Hackett replied instantly, as if he were negotiating a corporate merger. "The Vorak ascendancy is officially dissolved as of this minute. Your remaining core worlds are now a demilitarized protectorate of the United Earth Defense Coalition. Your surviving fleets will power down their weapons and await human boarding parties. You will hand over your zero-point matrix schematics, your medical databases, and your agricultural patents." Hackett paused, letting the silence stretch, ensuring the final blow landed with maximum gravity. "And you, Emperor Morath, will order your surviving command staff to put you in a stasis pod. You will be transported to Earth. You will stand trial at the Hague Tribunal for the unprovoked orbital bombardment of Proxima 9 and the murder of 3 million human citizens. You will be treated according to the Geneva Conventions, a concept of mercy your species clearly never invented." Morath fell to his knees in the dark, surrounded by the corpses of his elite guard. The empire that had ruled the Orion Spur for 10 millennia had been completely dismantled in less than a month by a species that hadn't even colonized their own solar system yet. "You called us fragile, Morath," Hackett said softly, his expression turning grim. You called us divided. You thought because we spent our history fighting ourselves, we were weak. You failed to understand the basic mechanics of a crucible. Hackett stood up, buttoning his uniform jacket. We fight each other because, until today, no one else in this universe was a worthy opponent. We spent 5,000 years forging the most ruthless military-industrial machine in existence, just waiting for a reason to point it all in the same direction. You gave us that reason. You united Earth. General Hackett looked down at the broken alien king one last time. We are only humans, Emperor. But as you've just learned, that is more than enough. Welcome to the new galaxy. The transmission abruptly cut to black, leaving Morith alone in the cold, silent ruins of his shattered empire, waiting for the human dropships to arrive. If you loved this story of humanity taking on the entire galaxy and showing them the true meaning of total war, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and tells the algorithm to push more HFY sci-fi content your way. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new story. We've got plenty more epic tales of Earth-kicking alien butt coming soon. Thanks for watching, and, as always, remember, never underestimate a human with a wrench and a grudge.
Hi, my name is Tran Trung, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, They're Only Humans, the Alien Emperor Laughed, Then Earth Declared Total War, HFY, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? For me, the strongest feeling was determination. What stayed with me wasn't just the scale of the conflict, but the idea that humanity's greatest strength came from setting aside differences and working toward a common purpose when everything was on the line. The story also reminds us that underestimating others can be a costly mistake. I'm curious which moment had the biggest impact on you. Was it the destruction of Proxima 9? Humanity's decision to stand together, or the final confrontation with the Emperor? And if you were part of that world, what do you think was the turning point that changed the outcome of the war? One lesson I took from this story is that preparation, teamwork, and resilience often matter more than appearances or first impressions. In everyday life, facing challenges with a clear goal and supporting the people around us can make a bigger difference than we expect. If this story kept you engaged or gave you something to reflect on, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy HFY stories about courage, unity, and human ingenuity, feel free to like the video or subscribe if you think it's worth your time.